The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty streets of Oklahoma City as Prudence Taylor clutched her threadbare shawl tighter around her trembling shoulders. Her father had just lost everything: their farm, their livestock, and now, it seemed, his last shred of human decency. $10 or one good milking cow, she heard him slur to the tall, imposing man with a silver-trimmed Stetson. Take her or leave her. The year was 1882, and Prudence Taylor, barely 20 years old, had just been sold like cattle to a stranger whose eyes were as cold as the Oklahoma winter. Prudence could scarcely believe what was happening. Just 3 days ago, she had been helping her mother in their modest kitchen, discussing plans for the harvest season. Now her mother was dead from fever, and her father had descended into a whiskey-soaked madness that culminated in this moment standing outside the rusty Spur saloon, offering his only daughter as payment for his mounting gambling debts. "Father, please," Prudence whispered, her voice catching as tears threatened to spill. Her long auburn hair whipped across her face in the evening breeze, partially concealing the bruise on her cheek, her father's parting gift when she had tried to reason with him earlier. The man in the Stetson, whose name she'd heard was Heath Prescott, studied her with an unreadable expression. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and couldn't be more than 28. His face was weathered from years under the prairie sun, but handsome in a rugged way that made Prudence look away quickly when his eyes met hers. "This ain't right, Jeremiah," Heath said, his voice low and dangerous, "even for a no-good drunkard like yourself." Jeremiah Taylor swayed on his feet, pointing an accusatory finger. "You'll take what I offer, or I'll find someone who will. Plenty of men in this territory would pay good money for a girl like her." Prudence felt the blood drain from her face. The thought of being sold to one of the rough men who frequented the saloons made her stomach turn. At least this cowboy, this Heath Prescott, didn't smell of whiskey and had the decency to look disgusted by her father's proposition. "I'll take her," Heath said suddenly, his voice cutting through the tense silence. Her heart dropped. Of course he would. Men always took what they wanted. "But not as payment for your debt," Heath continued, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small leather pouch. He tossed it at Jeremiah's feet. "There's $15, more than your debt and more than a good cow's worth. The debt's paid and the lady comes with me." Jeremiah snatched up the pouch, greedily counting the coins. "Deal," he muttered, already turning toward the saloon doors. "Father." Prudence called out one final plea, but he didn't even glance back. Heath Prescott turned to her, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Taylor, I suggest we leave before your father drinks that money and changes his mind." "Where are you taking me?" she asked, hating how her voice trembled. Something in his eyes shifted. Was it compassion? "Somewhere safe," he answered, offering his arm. "My ranch is a half-day's ride from here. You'll have your own room, and I give you my word you'll be treated with respect." "Why would you help me?" Prudence asked, suspicion edging into her voice. No man did something for nothing, especially not for a woman. Heath's eyes traveled past her to the setting sun. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be treated as property." He paused, then looked directly at her. "You're not a cow to be traded, Miss Taylor. No matter what your father thinks, you're worth more than that." Prudence hesitated, but what choice did she have? Stay and wait for her father to sell her to someone worse. She took a deep breath and placed her hand lightly on Heath's offered arm. "I don't have much," she said, gesturing to the small bundle of belongings clutched in her other hand. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "That's all right. Where we're going, you won't need much." As they walked toward the livery stable where his horse waited, Heath Prescott looked down at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You should know something, Miss Taylor. To the right kind of man, you're not property, you're treasure." Those words, spoken so simply in the dying light of day, would echo in Prudence's mind throughout the long ride ahead. Heath's horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion he called Thunder, snorted impatiently as they approached the livery. The animal stood 17 hands high, muscular and proud, with intelligent eyes that watched Prudence warily. "He doesn't take well to strangers," Heath warned as he secured her small bundle to the saddle, "but he'll get used to you." "Like his owner?" Prudence asked before she could stop herself. To her surprise, Heath laughed a genuine sound that transformed his face completely. "I reckon we're both stubborn creatures, madam, but neither of us bite. Usually." He helped her mount, his hands firm but respectful on her waist as he lifted her into the saddle. Then he swung up behind her with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent most of his life on horseback. The proximity was unsettling. Prudence had never been this close to a man who wasn't her father, and she could feel the solid warmth of Heath's chest against her back, his arms reaching around her to take the reins. "Comfortable?" he asked, his breath stirring the hair near her ear. "As much as possible, given the circumstances," she replied stiffly. They rode out of Oklahoma City as night fell, the town's lights receding behind them like dying embers. The prairie stretched before them, vast and dark under a blanket of stars. Prudence fought to stay awake, exhausted from the emotional toll of the day. But the rhythmic movement of the horse and the solid presence of the man behind her eventually lulled her into an uneasy sleep. She woke with a start when the horse stopped, disoriented until Heath's voice brought her back to reality. "We need to rest for a few hours," he said. "There's a creek ahead where we can water Thunder and get some sleep ourselves." The creek gurgled softly in the darkness, a silver ribbon under the moonlight. Heath dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. Her legs felt like jelly after hours in the saddle, and she stumbled against him. His hands steadied her, then quickly released her once she found her footing. "Sorry about that," she murmured, embarrassed. "Nothing to apologize for," he replied, busying himself with unsaddling Thunder and setting up a small camp. He worked efficiently, spreading a bedroll on the ground and lighting a small fire with practiced ease. "You take the bedroll," he said, passing her a canteen of water. "I'll keep watch." Prudence took a long drink, then glanced at him skeptically. "I'm not naive, Mr. Prescott. I know what men expect when they purchase a woman." Heath's expression hardened. "I didn't purchase you, Miss Taylor. I paid off your father's debt and removed you from a dangerous situation. There's a difference. And yet you own me now by the laws of this territory." He shook his head, crouching down to stir the small fire. "I don't own anyone, never have, never will. As far as I'm concerned, you're a free woman who needed help. Then why take me to your ranch? Why not just leave me in town?" The firelight played across his features as he considered her question. "Because a young woman alone in Oklahoma City wouldn't last a week without protection. At least at my ranch, you'll have safety, food, and honest work if you want it." "Work," she repeated, surprised. "My housekeeper could use help and I pay fair wages." He met her gaze steadily. "You can stay until you save enough to start fresh somewhere else if that's what you want." It sounded too good to be true, and in Prudence's experience, things that sounded too good to be true usually were. But something in Heath Prescott's direct gaze made her want to believe him. "Get some rest," he said, gesturing to the bedroll. "We've still got a long ride ahead of us tomorrow." Hesitantly, Prudence settled onto the bedroll, her back to the fire. She listened as Heath moved around the camp, checking on Thunder and adding wood to the fire. Eventually, she heard him settle on the other side of the flames, his back against a tree trunk. Despite her exhaustion, sleep evaded her. "Mr. Prescott," she called softly after a long silence. "Yes." His voice came immediately, alert. "Thank you for what you did back there." There was a pause before he responded. "No need for thanks, Miss Taylor. Now get some sleep." "Dawn comes early out here." Prudence closed her eyes, the crackling of the fire and the distant hooting of an owl the last sounds she registered before falling into a dreamless sleep. The morning arrived with a brilliance that startled Prudence awake. For a moment she was disoriented, the open sky above her unfamiliar after a lifetime of waking up under a wooden roof. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back, and she sat up quickly, searching for Heath. He was already awake, crouched by the creek, washing his face. His coat and hat hung on a nearby branch, and in just his shirt and vest, his frame looked even broader than she'd thought. When he stood and turned, water droplets clinging to his dark beard, Prudence quickly averted her gaze. "Morning," he called, reaching for a small sack near the now extinguished fire. "Didn't want to wake you, but we should eat and get moving if we want to reach the ranch by midday." He offered her some jerky and hardtack, which she accepted gratefully. They ate in silence, the vast prairie around them beginning to stir with life as the sun climbed higher. "Have you lived in Oklahoma Territory long?" Prudence asked, trying to break the awkward silence. Heath nodded, chewing thoughtfully. "Since '78. Came out after the war with not much more than thunder and the clothes on my back. Built my place up from nothing." "The war? You mean the war between the states," he confirmed. "I was just a boy when it started, but old enough to fight by the end." Prudence studied him with new interest. That would make him older than she'd first thought, perhaps in his mid-30s. "Which side?" she asked boldly. A shadow crossed his face. "The losing one," he said simply, "but that's all behind us now. The West doesn't much care which uniform you wore, as long as you work hard and mind your own business." He stood, dusting off his hands. "Speaking of work, we should get moving." The ride that day was less uncomfortable than the previous night. Prudence was growing accustomed to the rhythm of Thunder's gait and the solidity of Heath's presence behind her. The landscape changed gradually, the flat prairie giving way to gentle rolling hills dotted with cottonwoods and small creeks. "That's Willow Creek," Heath said, pointing to a distant line of trees. "My land starts there and stretches north about 5 miles. As they drew closer, Prudence could make out fenced pastures where cattle grazed lazily in the midday sun. A 2-story house came into view, painted white with green shutters, with a large barn and several outbuildings nearby. It was nothing like the grand plantation houses she'd heard about back east, but compared to the one-room cabin she'd grown up in, it seemed palatial. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "It's home," Heath replied, a note of pride in his voice. "Built most of it myself with help from my ranch hands." As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the sun. She was older, perhaps in her 50s, with gray streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. "That's Mrs. Abernathy," Heath explained. "My housekeeper and the closest thing to a mother I've had since I was 12. She keeps this place and me in line, Mrs." Abernathy watched their approach with undisguised curiosity, her hands on her ample hips. "Heath Prescott," she called as they rode into the yard. "I didn't expect you back until tomorrow, and certainly not with a young lady." Heath dismounted and helped Prudence down, keeping a respectful distance once her feet touched the ground. "Mrs. Abernathy, this is Miss Prudence Taylor. She'll be staying with us for a while." The older woman's eyebrows rose, but she immediately stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, welcome, Miss Taylor. You look like you could use a hot meal and a bath, if you don't mind my saying so." Prudence, suddenly aware of her dusty clothes and tangled hair, managed a smile. "That sounds wonderful, Mrs. Abernathy, and please call me Prudence." "I'll see to Thunder," Heath said, already leading the horse toward the barn. "Mrs. Abernathy will show you to your room." The housekeeper waited until Heath was out of earshot before turning a shrewd gaze on Prudence. "Now, dear, you don't need to tell me your story if you don't want to, but I should warn you Mr. Prescott's a good man, but he keeps to himself. Don't go getting any romantic notions." Prudence felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I assure you, Mrs. Abernathy, romance is the furthest thing from my mind. Mr. Prescott offered me work and shelter when I had nowhere else to go, nothing more." The older woman studied her for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied. "Well then, let's get you settled. The east bedroom has a nice view of the sunrise, and it's far enough from Mr. Prescott's room that you'll have your privacy." As Prudence followed Mrs. Abernathy into the house, she couldn't help but glance back at the barn where Heath had disappeared. Whatever his reasons for helping her, she was grateful for the unexpected kindness and wary of the debt she now owed him. The east bedroom was simple but comfortable, with a real feather bed, a small writing desk beneath the window, and a washstand with a porcelain basin. After the cramped quarters of her father's cabin, it seemed luxurious. "Baths being drawn in the washroom down the hall," Mrs. Abernathy said, opening a cedar chest at the foot of the bed. "I've got some dresses here that might fit you, belonged to Mr. Prescott's sister before she moved east to get married. Nothing fancy, but they'll do until we can get you some proper clothes. Mr. Prescott has a sister, Prudence asked, surprised. Half-sister, technically, different mothers. She visited for a summer 3 years back, then returned to Boston where she met her husband. Mrs. Abernathy pulled out a simple blue dress. This should fit you well enough. After a blissful bath, her first with hot water in longer than she could remember, Prudence felt almost human again. The blue dress was a bit loose in the bodice but otherwise fit reasonably well. Mrs. Abernathy had provided a ribbon for her hair, which she tied back in a simple style. When she ventured downstairs, she found Heath seated at the kitchen table, freshly washed himself and studying what appeared to be account books. He looked up when she entered, and for a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes before his expression returned to its usual reserve. "Miss Taylor," he acknowledged, standing politely, "I trust you found everything satisfactory?" "More than satisfactory, Mr. Prescott. I don't know how to thank you properly." He gestured for her to sit across from him. "Mrs. Abernathy's preparing supper. She's a far better cook than I deserve." As if on cue, the housekeeper bustled in from the pantry, arms full of vegetables. "Good timing, dear. Would you mind helping with these potatoes while I see to the roast?" Grateful for something useful to do, Prudence set to work peeling and cutting potatoes. The domestic scene felt strangely normal, as if she hadn't been sold by her father just yesterday. "Mr. Prescott was just telling me how you two met," Mrs. Abernathy said, shooting Heath a significant look. "Said he offered you a position here when he heard you needed work." Prudence's hands stilled momentarily. He hadn't told the truth about how she came to be here. She glanced at Heath, who met her gaze steadily, a silent message passing between them. "Yes," she said carefully. "Mr. Prescott was very kind when he learned of my difficult circumstances, Mrs." Abernathy nodded approvingly. "Well, we can certainly use the help around here. This place is too big for one person to manage, and these men generate more laundry than seems humanly possible." Throughout the meal, Prudence observed Heath. He ate methodically, answering Mrs. Abernathy's questions about his business in Oklahoma City, and occasionally directing a polite inquiry to Prudence about whether she found her accommodations comfortable. He was unfailingly courteous, but maintained an emotional distance that she found both reassuring and somehow disappointing. After dinner, Heath excused himself to check on the livestock, leaving Prudence to help Mrs. Abernathy with the dishes. He wasn't always so reserved, the housekeeper said suddenly, handing Prudence a plate to dry. "The war changed him, and then what happened with his wife?" "His wife." Prudence couldn't hide her surprise. Mrs. Abernathy's eyes widened. "Oh, I've said too much. It's not my story to tell." She busied herself with scrubbing a pot. "Just know that Mr. Prescott has his reasons for keeping people at arm's length." That night, lying in the unfamiliar comfort of the feather bed, Prudence stared at the ceiling and wondered about the enigmatic man who had rescued her. A widower, apparently, with wounds from a war long over and a kindness that seemed at odds with his guarded nature. As she drifted toward sleep, Prudence resolved to repay his generosity by being the most diligent helper Mrs. Abernathy could ask for, and by respecting the boundaries Heath Prescott so clearly needed. The first week at Willow Creek Ranch established a routine. Prudence rose early to help Mrs. Abernathy prepare breakfast for Heath and the 3 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse. The men would eat quickly, speaking little, then head out to their daily tasks. Prudence would spend her mornings learning the household systems from Mrs. Abernathy, where linens were stored, how the pantry was organized, which day was best for baking bread. In the afternoons, she tackled whatever needed doing. Mending clothes, churning butter, preserving the garden's bounty. She saw Heath only at mealtimes and occasionally glimpsed him riding across the property, a solitary figure silhouetted against the vast Oklahoma sky on the 8th day. As Prudence hung laundry on the line behind the house, she spotted Heath in the corral, working with a spirited young colt. She paused, a damp shirt in her hands, watching as he moved with patient confidence around the nervous animal. "He has a way with horses," Mrs. Abernathy said, appearing beside Prudence with another basket of wet clothes. "Always has. Even the wildest ones calm down for him eventually." "He's very patient," Prudence observed, watching as Heath stood perfectly still, allowing the colt to approach him cautiously. With horses, yes, Mrs. Abernathy agreed with a knowing smile. People are another matter entirely. Later that afternoon, Prudence was in the kitchen kneading dough when Heath entered unexpectedly. He stopped short when he saw her, flour dusting her forearms and a strand of hair falling across her flushed face. "I beg your pardon," he said formally. "I didn't realize you would be in here." "It's your kitchen, Mr. Prescott," Prudence replied, tucking the wayward strand of hair behind her ear. "You don't need to apologize for entering it." He shifted awkwardly, then gestured to the coffee pot on the stove. "I just came for some coffee." "Let me get it for you," she offered, wiping her hands on her apron. "No need," he said quickly. "Your hands are occupied." He moved to the stove, his tall frame making the spacious kitchen suddenly seem smaller. As he poured his coffee, he glanced at the dough she was working. "That looks like Mrs. Abernathy's sourdough," Prudence nodded. "She's teaching me her recipe. She says it's your favorite." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "It is. My mother used to make something similar before." He stopped abruptly, then took a sip of his coffee. "You're settling in well, then?" "Yes, thank you. Mrs. Abernathy has been very patient with my limited domestic skills." "I doubt they're as limited as you claim," he said, watching as she expertly folded the dough. "You seem quite capable." The compliment, simple as it was, warmed her. "Thank you, Mr. Prescott." A moment of silence stretched between them, neither uncomfortable nor entirely easy. "I saw you with the colt today," Prudence ventured. "He seems to be coming along well." Heath's expression brightened slightly. "Starlight, yes, he's showing promise." "Would you like to meet him properly sometime?" The invitation surprised her. "I'd like that very much, though I should warn you I have very little experience with horses." "Everyone starts somewhere," he said, setting down his empty cup. "Tomorrow afternoon, perhaps." "After you've finished your duties with Mrs. Abernathy." "Tomorrow afternoon," she agreed, unable to suppress a smile. He nodded once, then strode from the kitchen, leaving Prudence staring after him, hands still deep in dough, wondering if she'd imagined the brief connection that had sparked between them. The next day dawned clear and cool, a perfect late September morning. Prudence found herself anticipating the afternoon with a flutter of excitement she hadn't felt in years. She threw herself into her morning chores with extra vigor, earning an amused look from Mrs. Abernathy. "Someone's in high spirits today," the housekeeper remarked as they prepared lunch. Prudence felt her cheeks warm. "Mr. Prescott offered to introduce me to the young colt he's training." Mrs. Abernathy's eyebrows rose. "Did he now? That's interesting." "Why interesting?" The older woman smiled cryptically. "Mr. Prescott doesn't usually share his horses with anyone." "He must think highly of you." Before Prudence could respond, the kitchen door opened, and Heath entered with two of his ranch hands. Jackson, a quiet man in his 40s with a graying beard, and Ali, a younger man with an easy smile. "Smells good in here, Mrs. Ali said appreciatively, removing his hat. "Wash up first, Ali Jenkins," Mrs. Abernathy scolded good-naturedly. "I won't have trail dust in my kitchen." As the men moved to the wash basin outside, Heath's eyes met Prudence's briefly. "Still on for this afternoon?" he asked quietly. She nodded, trying to ignore Mrs. Abernathy's knowing look. After lunch, Prudence changed into her sturdiest skirt and boots, then made her way to the corral where Heath was waiting. The young colt, a dappled gray with a white star on his forehead, pranced nervously in the enclosure. "This is Starlight," Heath said as she approached. "He's just over a year old, still figuring out the world." "He's beautiful," Prudence said sincerely. Heath handed her an apple. "Approach slowly with your palm flat. Let him come to you." Prudence did as instructed, heart pounding as the spirited young horse eyed her warily. After a moment's hesitation, curiosity overcame caution, and the colt stretched his neck toward the offering. "That's it," Heath murmured, standing close enough that Prudence could feel the warmth of him beside her. "He's deciding if you're a friend." Velvety lips tickled her palm as Starlight delicately took the apple. Prudence couldn't help the delighted laugh that escaped her. "He's so gentle." Heath smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. He can also be a stubborn little devil when the mood strikes him. For the next hour, Heath showed Prudence how to move around the colt, how to speak to him in soothing tones, and the proper way to stroke his neck. The lesson was as much about Heath as it was about Starlight. Prudence found herself watching the way the cowboy's hands moved with confident gentleness, how his voice changed when he spoke to the animals, becoming softer and more expressive than she'd ever heard it. "How did you learn all this?" she asked as they leaned against the corral fence, watching Starlight prance around his enclosure. Heath's expression turned distant. "My father was good with horses. Before the war, he raised them in Virginia. I learned from watching him." It was the most personal information he'd volunteered since she'd arrived. Emboldened, Prudence pressed, "And after the war, there wasn't much left of our farm," he said, his voice flat. "So I headed west with what little I had. Worked cattle drives, saved every penny. Eventually bought this place when it was nothing but overgrown prairie and a half-collapsed cabin." "You've built something impressive," Prudence said softly. His eyes met hers, something unguarded in them for once. "It's been a long road." A comfortable silence settled between them as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the ranch in golden light. "I should check on the other horses before dinner," Heath said eventually, straightening up. "Of course," Prudence nodded, suddenly uncertain. The afternoon had felt almost like friendship, and she was reluctant to see it end. "Thank you for introducing me to Starlight." Heath hesitated, then said, "If you're interested, I could show you more tomorrow, maybe teach you to ride." The invitation hung in the air between them, weighted with more significance than its simple words suggested. "I'd like that," Prudence replied, meeting his gaze steadily. As they walked back toward the house, Prudence noticed Mrs. Abernathy watching from the kitchen window, a satisfied smile on her face. Over the next 2 weeks, the riding lessons became a daily ritual. Heath started Prudence on Daisy, a gentle older mare with infinite patience for beginners. Under his careful instruction, Prudence progressed from nervous uncertainty to growing confidence, learning to guide the mare around the paddock and eventually onto the paths that wound through the ranch property. During these afternoon sessions, the formal distance between them gradually diminished. Heath shared stories of his early days in the territory, the hard winters, and the satisfaction of watching his herd grow. Prudence, in turn, told him about her mother's garden, the books she'd managed to read despite her father's disapproval of female education, and her dreams of someday seeing more of the world than just Oklahoma territory. One golden October afternoon, they rode to a small lake at the northern edge of the property. The water reflected the blue sky and surrounding cottonwoods, their leaves turning yellow and orange with the season. "This is my favorite spot on the ranch," Heath admitted as they dismounted. "Especially this time of year." "It's beautiful," Prudence agreed, taking in the peaceful scene. Heath spread a blanket on the grass, and they sat watching dragonflies skim across the water's surface. He had brought a small lunch, bread, cheese, and apples, which they shared in companionable silence. "Do you ever regret coming west?" Prudence asked eventually. Heath considered the question, his gaze on the distant horizon. "No, there were hard times, lonely times, but I never regretted it." He glanced at her. "What about you? Do you miss your home?" Prudence thought of the small cabin, her father's increasing bitterness after her mother's death, the fear that had become her constant companion. "I miss my mother," she said honestly, "and the lilac bush she planted by the door, but the rest," she shook her head. "No, I don't miss it." Heath nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Sometimes the place you come from isn't the place you belong." "And do you belong here?" she asked softly. "I do," he replied without hesitation, then more quietly, "more so lately." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but unmistakable. Prudence felt her heart quicken as Heath's gaze held hers, something warm and questioning in his eyes. The moment was broken by a distant rumble of thunder. Heath looked up, frowning at the dark clouds gathering on the western horizon. "We should head back," he said, already gathering the remains of their lunch. "That storm's moving fast." They mounted quickly and turned the horses toward home, but the storm moved faster than anticipated. They were still a mile from the ranch house when the skies opened, drenching them in minutes. "There's a line shack ahead," Heath called over the downpour, pointing to a small structure barely visible through the rain. "We can wait it out there." The line shack was crude but dry, a single room with a small stove, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a narrow cot. Heath quickly lit the lamp hanging by the door, then built a small fire in the stove while Prudence stood shivering in her sodden clothes. "Here," he said, pulling a wool blanket from a trunk. "You should get out of that wet dress before you catch your death." Prudence clutched the blanket, glancing around the one-room shack. Where should I?" Understanding her concern, Heath turned his back. "I'll look after the horses." "Take your time." As he stepped back into the rain, Prudence quickly stripped off her dripping dress and petticoat, wrapping the blanket tightly around herself. The wool was rough against her skin but wonderfully warm. When Heath returned, he was even more soaked than before. Water dripped from his hat and ran in rivulets down his face. "The horses are under the lean-to," he reported, removing his hat and drenched coat. His shirt clung to his broad shoulders, transparent with water. Prudence averted her eyes, suddenly aware of the impropriety of their situation alone in this tiny shelter, she in nothing but a blanket, he now removing his wet shirt to reveal a muscled torso marked with old scars. "I'm sorry," he said, noticing her discomfort. "I should have thought." He grabbed another blanket from the trunk, wrapping it around his shoulders. "It's all right," Prudence said, finding her voice. "Better than drowning out there." A flash of lightning illuminated the shack, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. Prudence jumped, inadvertently stepping closer to Heath. "It's right overhead," he said, his voice gentle, "but we're safe here." Their eyes met in the lamplight, and something shifted in the air between them. Heath's gaze dropped briefly to her lips, then back to her eyes, a question in his expression. "Prudence," he said softly, the first time he'd used her given name. The sound of it on his lips broke something loose inside her. Without thinking, she closed the small distance between them, her hand reaching up to touch his face. His beard was rough against her palm, but his eyes were soft as they searched hers. "I shouldn't," he whispered, even as his hand came up to cover hers. "Why not?" she challenged gently. "Because you deserve better than a broken-down soldier with nothing to offer but a piece of land and a troubled past." "Let me decide what I deserve," Prudence said, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. For one suspended moment, neither moved. Then Heath's resolve crumbled visibly, and he lowered his head to hers, his lips meeting hers in a kiss so tender it made her knees weak. The storm raged outside, but inside the line shack, a different kind of storm was breaking, one that had been building since the moment Heath Prescott had looked at Jeremiah Taylor and decided that his daughter was worth saving. When they finally drew apart, Heath's eyes were dark with emotion. "I never expected this," he admitted, his voice rough. "When I brought you here, I only meant to give you safety, a chance to build your own life." "And now?" Prudence asked, her fingers still entwined with his. "Now I can't imagine this place without you in it," he said simply. Outside, the storm was beginning to move on, the thunder more distant, the rain softening to a steady patter on the roof. But neither was in any hurry to leave the shelter they had found, not just from the weather, but from the loneliness that had defined both their lives for too long. They returned to the ranch as dusk was falling, their clothes still damp but their spirits light. Mrs. Abernathy met them at the door with raised eyebrows and dry clothes, making no comment about their prolonged absence beyond a knowing dinner's keeping warm on the stove. That evening marked a turning point. Though they maintained propriety, Heath still slept in his room at the far end of the hall. Prudence in hers. Everything had changed. Their glances across the dinner table held new meaning. Their hands found reasons to touch when passing the salt or reaching for the same book. And their afternoon rides became treasured opportunities to speak freely about hopes and fears that had long gone unvoiced. 2 weeks after the thunderstorm, Heath found Prudence in the garden, harvesting the last of the season's tomatoes before the first frost. He watched her for a moment, struck by how naturally she fit into this place that had once felt so empty. "Prudence," he called softly, approaching with something hidden behind his back. She looked up, smiling at the sight of him. "I thought you were checking the north pasture today." "I was. I finished early." He shifted, suddenly looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I have something for you." From behind his back, he produced a small wooden box beautifully carved with wild roses. "I made this," he said, holding it out to her. "Open it." Prudence set down her basket of tomatoes, wiping her hands on her apron before taking the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft fabric, lay a silver locket. "Oh, Heath," she breathed, lifting it carefully. "It's beautiful." "It was my mother's," he explained, watching her face intently. "One of the few things I brought west with me." The significance of the gift wasn't lost on Prudence. She looked up at him, her eyes questioning. "I know it's only been a month," Heath said, taking her hand in his, "and I know that how you came to be here wasn't conventional, but I want you to know that you're not obligated to stay. The money I paid your father, that debt was settled the moment you set foot on this ranch. I'm not staying out of obligation, Heath," Prudence said softly. He nodded, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I hope not. Because I find myself wanting to ask you something, but I need you to know that you're free to answer however you wish." Prudence's heart began to race. "Ask me." Heath took a deep breath. "When I first saw you in Oklahoma City, standing there with your chin up despite everything, I thought you were the bravest person I'd ever met. And when your father tried to sell you for the price of a cow, all I could think was that he had no idea what you were really worth." He dropped to one knee in the garden soil, still holding her hand. "Prudence Taylor, you're not property to be bought or sold. You're a treasure beyond price, and if you'll have me, I'd consider it the greatest honor of my life to call you my wife." Tears blurred Prudence's vision as she looked down at this man who had rescued her from desperation and then, against all odds, had given her heart a home as well. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Heath Prescott, I will marry you." His face broke into a smile of such uninhibited joy that it transformed him completely. He rose to his feet, lifting her off the ground and spinning her in a circle that sent the remaining tomatoes rolling across the garden. "Mrs. Abernathy's going to have my hide for that," he laughed against her hair. "Worth it," Prudence replied, pulling back to look at his face. "Besides, I suspect she's been planning this wedding since the day I arrived." Heath's laughter faded into something more serious. "I want you to know," he said, cupping her face in his calloused hands, "that I'll spend every day making sure you never regret this decision." "I know," Prudence said simply, rising on tiptoes to seal the promise with a kiss. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Oklahoma City, with Mrs. Abernathy, the ranch hands, and a few neighboring families as witnesses. Prudence wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Abernathy had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair and Heath's mother's locket around her neck. Heath, usually so reserved, couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked down the aisle toward him. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, his kiss held all the promise of the life they were beginning together, not as rescuer and rescued, but as equal partners in whatever lay ahead. The wedding celebration continued at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hanging from the trees. There was music from a fiddle played by Jackson, who turned out to have quite a talent, and dancing that continued long after the sun had set. Late in the evening, as the party began to wind down, Heath drew Prudence away from the festivities, leading her to the corral where Starlight watched them curiously over the fence. "I have another gift for you," he said, his eyes bright in the moonlight. From his pocket, he pulled a small iron key. "This is yours now," he said, placing it in her palm. "What does it open?" she asked, examining it in the soft glow of the nearby lanterns. "The deed box in our study," Heath explained. "Inside, you'll find the papers to Willow Creek Ranch, now with both our names. Whatever happens, you'll never be without a home or means again." Prudence's throat tightened with emotion. After a lifetime of uncertainty and her father's casual cruelty, the security Heath offered was almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she whispered, closing her fingers around the key. But you know that's not why I married you, he smiled, drawing her close. I know. You married me because, against all odds, you saw something worth loving in a scarred old soldier who'd forgotten what happiness felt like. Not so old, she corrected, rising to kiss him. And those scars, they're just part of the road that led you to me. Their return to the party was met with knowing smiles and a few good-natured jests from the ranch hands. As midnight approached, Mrs. Abernathy discreetly ushered the last guests toward home, giving Heath and Prudence a warm embrace before retiring to her own small house at the edge of the property, her wedding gift to them being privacy in the main house. Standing on the porch, watching the last lanterns being extinguished, Prudence felt Heath's arms encircle her from behind, his chin resting on top of her head. "Happy, Mrs. Prescott?" he murmured against her hair. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning back into his embrace. "And you?" His arms tightened around her. "I rode into Oklahoma City looking to buy a cow," he said, the humor in his voice unmistakable. "Instead, I found the other half of my soul." "For the price of a cow," Prudence reminded him, turning in his arms to face him. Heath's expression grew serious. "No," he said firmly, "never that. What's between us can't be bought or sold." His hand came up to touch the locket at her throat. "Remember what I told you that first day, you're not property, you're treasure." And as he led her into their home, truly hers now, as well as his Prudence knew that she had found her own treasure. Not in the land or the house or the security they provided, but in the heart of the man who had seen her value when everyone else had overlooked it. Winter settled over Willow Creek Ranch, transforming the landscape into a world of pristine white. The first heavy snow came in early December, coating the trees and buildings in a thick blanket that glittered in the weak winter sunlight. For Prudence, the season brought a new kind of contentment. The cozy evenings by the fire with Heath, reading aloud from his small collection of books, or simply talking about their days. The satisfaction of seeing the pantry shelves stocked with the preserves she and Mrs. Abernathy had put up during the fall harvest. The sense of permanence and belonging that grew stronger with each passing day. Marriage to Heath was different from anything she could have imagined. He was unfailingly considerate, seeking her opinion on decisions about the ranch, teaching her to manage the accounts alongside him, treating her as a true partner rather than a subordinate. And in the privacy of their bedroom, he was tender and passionate, his love expressed in touches and whispers that made her feel cherished beyond measure. One snowy evening in January, as they sat before the fire in the parlor, Heath glanced up from the letter he was writing to his sister in Boston. "Do you miss it?" he asked suddenly. "Having a woman's companionship, I mean. Mrs. Abernathy is wonderful, but she's not the same as having a friend your own age." Prudence considered the question as she continued her mending. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But the Evans family visits often enough, and Maria is becoming a good friend." She smiled at him. "Besides, I have you." He returned her smile, but there was a thoughtful look in his eyes. "Spring will be here before we know it. The roads will clear, and Oklahoma City will be accessible again." "Are you planning a trip?" she asked, setting aside her sewing. "I thought we might go together," Heath suggested. "You could visit the dressmaker, perhaps see about ordering some books from back east, and," he hesitated, "we could look into adding on to the house." Prudence raised an eyebrow. "Adding on? The house seems plenty large for the two of us." Heath set down his pen, looking suddenly nervous. "It is for now, but I was thinking that in the future we might need more room." Understanding dawned, and Prudence's hand instinctively went to her stomach. "Heath Prescott, are you saying you want to have children?" "If you want them too," he said quickly. "I know we haven't discussed it directly, but I hoped." Prudence crossed the room to sit beside him, taking his hands in hers. "I do want them, very much." The relief and joy that spread across his face made her heart swell. "Good," he said softly. "I've been thinking about a little girl with your auburn hair, or maybe a boy with your courage." "I was imagining a boy with your integrity," Prudence countered, leaning against his shoulder. "Or a girl with your gentle heart." Heath pressed a kiss to her temple. "Either way, they'll be loved." "Yes," Prudence agreed, thinking of her own father's cold indifference and how different her children's lives would be. "They will be." The conversation about children took on new significance 2 weeks later, when Prudence began to suspect that their planning might have been prescient. The telltale signs were subtle at first: a persistent fatigue, a strange aversion to the coffee she usually enjoyed, moments of lightheadedness when she stood too quickly. She confided her suspicions to Mrs. Abernathy, who confirmed them with a knowing smile and practical advice gained from years of helping other young wives in the territory. That evening, after dinner, Prudence asked Heath to join her for a walk, despite the cold. Bundled in heavy coats and scarves, they made their way to the barn, where the air was warmed by the presence of the horses and sweet with the scent of hay. "Is everything all right?" Heath asked. Noting her unusual quietness, Prudence nodded, gathering her courage. "Everything is perfect, actually. I have something to tell you." His expression grew concerned. "What is it?" Taking a deep breath, she took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat abdomen. "Come spring, we'll be welcoming more than just new calves to Willow Creek." Heath stared at her, uncomprehending for a moment, then his eyes widened as understanding dawned. We're going to have a baby," Prudence confirmed, her voice trembling with emotion. "Probably in late August, according to Mrs. Abernathy's calculations." For a moment, Heath stood perfectly still, his hand warm against her through the layers of her clothing. Then, to her surprise, his eyes filled with tears. "Heath," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "I never thought I'd have this," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "After the war, after Sarah died, I convinced myself that I wasn't meant for happiness, that the ranch was all I'd ever have." He looked down at her with such naked adoration that it took her breath away. "And then you came into my life and everything changed." He dropped to his knees in the hay, pressing his face against her middle. "Thank you," he murmured, "for giving me back my future." Prudence ran her fingers through his dark hair, her own tears falling freely now. "We gave it back to each other," she corrected gently. When he stood, Heath lifted her off her feet in a careful embrace, as if she had suddenly become infinitely precious and fragile. "Put me down, you ridiculous man," she laughed through her tears. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass." "Can't blame me for being careful with my treasures," he replied, but he set her on her feet, keeping his arms around her. In the stall nearby, Starlight nickered softly, as if offering his own congratulations. The colt, nearly a horse now, had become Prudence's special project over the winter months, responding to her gentle persistence where he sometimes still balked at others. "I think he approves," Heath said, glancing at the dappled gray. "Of course he does," Prudence replied, wiping away the last of her happy tears. "He knows our child will need a gentle mount someday." As they walked back to the house, snowflakes began to fall again, catching in their hair and on their eyelashes. Heath paused to look up at the night sky where stars glimmered between breaks in the clouds. "I never properly thanked God for bringing you to me," he said quietly, "even if it was through such difficult circumstances." Prudence squeezed his hand. "I've thanked him every day since that sunset in Oklahoma City." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the spring as the snow melted and the first green shoots appeared in the fields. Heath insisted on hiring additional help for the ranch so that Prudence wouldn't overtax herself, though she assured him repeatedly that she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal duties. "Humor me," he'd say, kissing her forehead, "just until the baby comes." By June, her condition was unmistakable, her dresses let out to accommodate her growing belly. The summer heat made her uncomfortable, but the anticipation of the baby's arrival kept her spirits high. She and Heath spent evenings on the porch swing, his hand resting on her abdomen to feel the strong kicks of their active child. "He's going to be a handful," Heath predicted after a particularly vigorous series of movements. Prudence raised an eyebrow. "You sound very certain." Heath shrugged, smiling. "Just a feeling, though I'll be just as happy with a daughter who takes after her mother." "What would you name a son?" Prudence asked, curious. They had discussed girls' names extensively but hadn't settled on a boy's name yet. Heath was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking about Benjamin, after my brother." I didn't know you had a brother, Prudence said softly. He died at Gettysburg, Heath explained, his eyes distant with old grief. He was only 19. Prudence covered his hand with hers. Benjamin is a beautiful name, Benjamin Prescott. Heath's smile returned, gentle and grateful. And what about you? Any family names you'd want to pass on? Prudence considered. My mother's father was named Thomas. He was a kind man, from what she told me. Benjamin Thomas Prescott. Heath tried the name aloud. It has a good sound to it. And if it's a girl, I still like a leaner after your mother. Prudence leaned against him, content. So do I. As July turned to August, the ranch prepared for both the coming harvest and the imminent arrival of the baby. A cradle that Heath had secretly been crafting in the barn was brought into their bedroom, its wood smooth and polished, with intricate carvings of horses and wildflowers decorating the sides. It's exquisite, Prudence breathed when he presented it to her. When did you find time to make this? I worked on it whenever you were resting, he admitted. I wanted it to be a surprise. The baby, however, seemed determined to create a surprise of its own by arriving early. On a sweltering afternoon in mid-August, while Heath was in the north pasture overseeing the repair of a fence, Prudence felt the first sharp pain low in her back. Mrs. Abernathy, experienced in such matters, confirmed what Prudence already suspected. The baby was coming, and coming quickly. "Send for the doctor," she instructed Jackson, who had come to the house for supplies. "And find Mr. Prescott." The hours that followed were a blur of pain and determination for Prudence. The doctor arrived from town just as the contractions were intensifying, but Heath was still nowhere to be found. "Don't worry about him now," Mrs. Abernathy soothed, wiping Prudence's forehead with a cool cloth. "Men are useless at times like these anyway." But as the sun began to set and the moment of birth drew closer, Prudence found herself wishing desperately for Heath's steady presence. "He should be here," she gasped between contractions. "Something's wrong." "Nothing's wrong except that baby of yours being in an almighty hurry," the doctor assured her. "Now, Mrs. Prescott, when the next pain comes, I need you to push with all your might." The next contraction built like a wave, and Prudence bore down with a strength she didn't know she possessed. As the pain crested, the bedroom door burst open, and Heath stood there, his clothes dusty from the trail, his face pale with worry. "I'm here," he said, moving quickly to her side. "I'm here, Prudence." She reached for his hand, relief flooding through her. "Where were you?" "The fence repair took longer than expected, and then thunder threw a shoe on the way back," he explained, pressing her hand to his lips. "I came as fast as I could." Another contraction seized her, cutting off further conversation. Heath stayed beside her, his strong hand anchoring her through the pain, his voice a constant encouragement. "You're the strongest person I know," he told her between contractions. "You can do this, Prudence. Our baby is almost here." With one final, tremendous effort, Prudence pushed, and the room filled with the indignant wail of a newborn. "A boy," the doctor announced triumphantly. "A fine, healthy boy." Heath's grip on her hand tightened, and when Prudence looked up at him, she saw tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "We have a son," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. Minutes later, the baby was cleaned, wrapped in a soft blanket, and placed in Prudence's arms. She looked down at the tiny red face, the shock of dark hair, the perfect miniature fingers, and felt a love so overwhelming it seemed to physically expand her chest. "Hello, Benjamin Thomas Prescott," she murmured, tracing a gentle finger along his cheek. "We've been waiting for you." Heath sat on the edge of the bed, his arm around Prudence's shoulders, his eyes never leaving their son's face. "He's perfect," he said hoarsely. "Absolutely perfect." Mrs. Abernathy, wiping away her own tears, shooed the doctor out of the room. "Let's give the new family some time alone," she said, closing the door behind them. In the quiet that followed, Prudence and Heath simply watched their son, marveling at his existence, at the miracle that had brought them together to create this new life. "I never thought I could be this happy," Heath said, breaking the silence. "When I rode into Oklahoma City that day, I was just looking to collect a debt and maybe buy a cow for the ranch. Instead, you got a wife and now a son," Prudence said, smiling despite her exhaustion. I got a family, Heath corrected, his voice thick with emotion. I got a future. As Benjamin began to fuss, Prudence guided him to her breast, where he latched on with surprising determination. Strong like his father, she observed. And beautiful like his mother, Heath countered, dropping a kiss on her forehead. The three of them stayed that way, cocooned in their private joy as night fell over Willow Creek Ranch. Outside, the stars appeared one by one, witnesses to the love that had transformed two solitary lives into something greater than either could have imagined. Benjamin Thomas Prescott grew quickly, a strong and curious child with his father's dark hair and his mother's expressive eyes. By his first birthday, he was taking unsteady steps around the ranch house, his chubby hands reaching for everything in sight. Life at Willow Creek fell into a new rhythm, days structured around Benjamin's schedule, quiet evenings spent as a family, the ranch continuing to prosper under Heath and Prudence's careful management. As the second anniversary of Prudence's arrival at the ranch approached, Heath surprised her by announcing a trip to Oklahoma City. Mrs. Abernathy has agreed to watch Benjamin for 2 days, he explained as they sat on the porch after putting their son to bed. I thought we could use some time just for us. That sounds wonderful, Prudence admitted, realizing how long it had been since they'd had more than a few hours alone together. But what's the occasion? Heath smiled mysteriously. You'll see. The journey to Oklahoma City was pleasant, the October weather mild and the countryside beautiful in its autumn colors. They stayed at the new hotel in town, enjoying the novelty of meals they hadn't prepared themselves and uninterrupted conversations. On the second day after lunch, Heath suggested a walk. There's something I want to show you, he said, offering his arm. He led her through the growing town, which had changed considerably in the 2 years since she'd last seen it. New buildings lined the main street, and the sounds of construction echoed from several lots where even more businesses were being established. They turned down a side street, and Heath stopped in front of a newly painted storefront with a sign that read Willow Creek Mercantile. What is this? Prudence asked, puzzled. Heath withdrew a key from his pocket. It's yours if you want it, he said, unlocking the door and gesturing for her to enter. The interior was spacious and bright, with shelves along the walls and a polished counter at the back. It was empty of merchandise but clean and ready for use. I don't understand, Prudence said, turning to him. Heath took her hands in his. I've watched you these past 2 years, Prudence. You're an extraordinary mother and partner, and you've helped make the ranch more successful than I ever dreamed. But I also know that you've always wanted more, to see more of the world, to use your mind in different ways. He gestured around the store. This could be your place. A mercantile managed by you, selling not just the usual goods but perhaps books, quality fabrics, things from back east that people out here can't easily get. Prudence stared at him, speechless. The railroad's coming through next year, Heath continued. Oklahoma City is growing fast. This could be a real opportunity. He squeezed her hands. You could ride in with me 2 or 3 days a week. Mrs. Abernathy is already besotted with Benjamin and would be delighted to have more time with him. And I would make sure you always got home safely. You would do this for me. Prudence finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Heath's expression was earnest. I would do anything to make you happy, Prudence. You gave up everything to come to Willow Creek, not that you had much choice at the time, he acknowledged with a wry smile. But you've made it a home. You've made it a family. I want to give you something back, something that's just yours. Tears filled Prudence's eyes as she looked around the empty store, suddenly seeing the possibilities. Books lining the walls, fabrics and notions that would bring color and beauty to the homes of pioneer women, perhaps even a small reading area where customers could browse through catalogs from Eastern merchants. I love it, she said, turning back to Heath. I absolutely love it. But can we afford it? Heath smiled. The ranch had its best year yet, and I've been saving specifically for this. The building is paid for and there's enough to stock it with initial inventory. He paused, looking suddenly uncertain. That is, if it's something you want to do. In answer, Prudence threw her arms around him. Yes, she said against his shoulder. Yes, it's exactly what I want to do. That evening, over dinner at the hotel restaurant, they talked excitedly about plans for the store, what it would stock, when it might open, how they would balance it with the ranch and Benjamin. "We could open by Christmas," Prudence suggested, her mind racing with ideas. "The holiday trade would be a good start." "Whatever you think best," Heath agreed, watching her with a smile. "It's your venture, our venture," she corrected. "Just like the ranch is our home, not just yours." His smile deepened. "I like the sound of that, partners in everything." As they walked back to their hotel room, arm in arm under the stars, Prudence felt a contentment that went beyond happiness. This was fulfillment, knowing that she was valued not just for what she could give to others, but for who she was in herself. The Willow Creek Mercantile opened its doors 2 days before Christmas, 1884. The shelves were stocked with practical goods as well as small luxuries. Books from publishers in New York and Boston, fabrics finer than anything previously available in the territory, toys for children that had been carefully selected from Eastern catalogs. The store was an immediate success. Women from all over the county came to see the new merchandise, especially drawn by the books and fabrics. Prudence's warm welcome and knowledge of her inventory made customers eager to return. Heath, true to his word, made sure Prudence got safely to and from the store the 3 days a week she was open. Sometimes Benjamin came with them, charming the customers with his toddler antics and Heath's obvious adoration of his son. The store brought Prudence a new kind of confidence. She discovered a talent for business, for anticipating what her customers would want before they knew they wanted it. She began corresponding with merchants in St. Louis and Chicago, establishing connections that would serve her well as the store grew. As spring approached in 1885, bringing with it Benjamin's second birthday, Prudence found herself thinking more and more about the journey that had brought her to this point, from a frightened young woman being sold by her father to a successful business owner, beloved wife, and mother. One evening, after Benjamin was in bed, she found Heath in his study going over the ranch accounts. "Do you ever think about that day in Oklahoma City?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "The day we met." Heath looked up, setting down his pen. "Often," he admitted. "I was angry at your father, disgusted by what he was trying to do, but I was also struck by you, the way you held yourself with dignity despite everything." "I was terrified," Prudence confessed, crossing the room to perch on the edge of his desk. "I had no idea what would happen to me." "So was I, in a way," Heath said, surprising her. "Not of you, but of what I was feeling. I hadn't let myself care about anyone since Sarah died. It was safer that way." "And now?" Prudence asked softly. Heath stood, drawing her into his arms. "Now I can't imagine life without you and Benjamin." "You're the heart of everything, Prudence." She leaned into his embrace, savoring the security and love she found there. "Do you know what I thought when you told my father I was worth more than a cow?" "What's that?" "I thought you were either a fool or a liar," she said with a small laugh. "No one had ever valued me before except my mother." Heath's arms tightened around her. "Then everyone else was blind," he said firmly. "Because from the moment I saw you, I knew you were a treasure beyond price." The words, so similar to what he had said that first day, filled Prudence with warmth. "And you," she said, rising on tiptoes to kiss him, "are the man who taught me that I was worth saving and loving." Outside, the first stars of evening appeared in the darkening sky. Inside the sturdy house at Willow Creek Ranch, a family built against all odds continued to grow in love and purpose, their future as bright as those distant stars and infinitely more precious. In the years that followed, the Prescott family flourished alongside their enterprises. The ranch expanded, acquiring neighboring properties when they became available. The mercantile grew into one of the most successful businesses in Oklahoma City, eventually occupying a larger building and hiring 2 clerks to help Prudence manage the increasing trade. Benjamin was joined by a sister, Eleanor Grace, in 1886, and then by another brother, James William, in 1889. The children grew strong and healthy, surrounded by the love of their parents and the wide open spaces of the ranch. Prudence often marveled at how completely her life had transformed from that desperate day in 1882. The frightened young woman being sold like property had become a confident business owner, respected throughout the county for her intelligence and integrity. The home that had once seemed like a refuge now truly belonged to her, not just legally but in her heart. And Heath, who had once been so guarded and solitary, had blossomed into an affectionate father and an openly devoted husband. The shadows of his past, the war, the loss of his first wife, the lonely years building the ranch alone had receded, replaced by the joyful chaos of family life. On a warm summer evening in 1892, 10 years after they had first met, Heath and Prudence sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching their children play in the twilight. Benjamin, now 8, was showing 5-year-old Alina how to throw a lasso, while 3-year-old James toddled after them, determined not to be left out. "They're growing so fast," Prudence observed, her hand finding Heath's on the armrest between them. "Too fast," Heath agreed, squeezing her fingers. "Seems like yesterday Benjamin was learning to walk and now he's talking about having his own horse." "Starlight's first colt would be perfect for him," Prudence suggested. "They already have a bond," Heath smiled at her. "You always know exactly the right match, whether it's horses and riders or fabrics and customers." "It's a gift," she replied with a playful smile. "Speaking of gifts, I have something for you." From her pocket, she withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Happy anniversary," she said, placing it in his hand. Heath looked surprised. "Our anniversary isn't for another month." "Not our wedding anniversary," Prudence clarified. "It's been exactly 10 years today since you found me in Oklahoma City." Understanding dawned in his eyes as he carefully unwrapped the package. Inside was a silver pocket watch, its case engraved with an image of Willow Creek Ranch as seen from the hill to the east. "Open it," Prudence urged softly. Heath clicked open the cover to find an inscription inside. "To Heath, who saw treasure where others saw only property, all my love, Prudence." For a moment he was silent, his thumb tracing the words, then he looked up at her, his eyes bright with emotion. "This is beautiful, Prudence. I'll cherish it always." "As I cherish you," she replied simply. "You changed my life that day, Heath. You gave me a future when I thought I had none." He shook his head. "We gave each other a future," he corrected gently. "I was just as lost as you were in my own way, just better at hiding it." From the yard came a triumphant shout as Benjamin successfully looped his small lasso around a fence post. Alina applauded enthusiastically, while James jumped up and down, demanding his turn. "We should call them in soon," Prudence said, though she was reluctant to end the peaceful moment. "It's nearly their bedtime." "In a minute," Heath said, his gaze still on their children. "I want to remember this, all of them, exactly as they are right now, you exactly as you are right now." Prudence followed his gaze, taking in the scene. Their beautiful children playing in the golden evening light, the house that had grown along with their family, the ranch that had prospered under their joint care. It was a life neither of them could have imagined that day in Oklahoma City, when a desperate father had tried to sell his daughter for the price of a cow. "We've been blessed," she said softly. Heath turned to her, the love in his eyes as strong and true as it had been on their wedding day. "Beyond measure," he agreed, leaning in to kiss her with a tenderness that still made her heart quicken after all these years. "And it all started because I recognized a treasure when I saw one." As the sun set over Willow Creek Ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the Prescott family gathered on the porch, Heath and Prudence with their arms around each other, their children clamoring for one more story before bedtime. They were exactly where they were meant to be, surrounded by the love that had transformed them and the future they had built together, one day at a time. And in the peaceful moments before sleep that night, as Heath held her close in their bed, Prudence reflected on the strange and wonderful journey that had brought her to this place of complete belonging. From property to be sold, to treasure to be cherished, it was a transformation that still seemed miraculous, even after all these years. "What are you thinking about?" Heath murmured against her hair, his voice drowsy. "About how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best," she replied, nestling closer to him. If my father hadn't been desperate enough to try to sell me that day, I would have found you some other way, Heath said with quiet certainty. Some things are meant to be, Prudence. We were meant to be. And as she drifted towards sleep in the arms of the man who had seen her true worth when no one else had, Prudence Prescott knew that he was right. They had been meant to find each other, to heal each other, to build this life together. It hadn't happened the way either of them would have chosen, but the journey had led them exactly where they needed to be in the end. That was all that mattered. Not how the story began, but how it continued day after day, year after year, with love that only grew stronger with the passing of time.